Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text. It is completely wild to think about, but right at this very second, the visual image of the room around you, the space you're sitting in right now, it's landing on your retina entirely upside down and backwards.
Yeah, it's an entirely inverted reality. Every single thing you see is flipped, and yet, your brain processes it so seamlessly that you never even feel disoriented.
Which is just, that blew my mind when I first learned it. And welcome to the deep dive. For you as a learner, if you're seeing medical physiology for the first time, dense mechanisms can be, overwhelming. So today, our mission is to build a complete understanding of the eye.
Right, and to do that, we have to follow a really strict logical chain. We're not just memorizing parts. We need to start with the physics of how light behaves, then see how the eye's anatomy actually captures it.
Yeah, and then how we regulate that capture, and what happens when the pressure inside this whole system goes wrong. So, let's unpack this from the very beginning. To understand the eye, we have to understand what it's capturing, which is light.
Exactly. And light doesn't behave the same way everywhere. In a total vacuum or even just in the air around us, it travels incredibly fast, like 300,000 kilometers per second fast.
Wow, okay.
Right. And because air gives almost no resistance, we give it a baseline refractive index of 1.00. But the moment that light wave hits a transparent solid or liquid.
Like a thick piece of glass or water.
Yeah, exactly. It physically slows down. So if a certain type of glass slows the light down to 200,000 kilometers per second, we just divide the speed in air by the speed in the glass, which gives us a refractive index of 1.50.
Okay, so if a beam of light is going straight through the air and hits a flat pane of glass perfectly head-on, like perpendicular, it just drops its speed, right?
Yeah.
But it keeps going straight forward.
It does. The distance between the individual waves compresses, but the direction doesn't change.
Right, but in the real world, light is rarely hitting surfaces perfectly head-on. It usually hits at an angle.
And that angulated interface between two different mediums, that's where the magic happens. That's what causes refraction. When light enters a denser medium at an angle, the rays actually physically bend.
I always like to picture a massive marching band for this to make it make sense. Imagine this really wide marching band, which is our wide wave of light, walking fast down a perfectly paved street.
Okay, I like this.
Right. And suddenly, the street cuts diagonally into this thick, muddy field. Mm-hmm. So the marchers on the far right side of the band, they hit the mud first. They immediately bog down and walk slower.
Right, because of the denser medium?
Exactly. But the marchers on the far left side are still on the pavement, walking at full speed. So because one side is moving faster than the other, the entire line naturally pivots into a totally new direction.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. That difference in velocity along the wavefront dictates the new direction of travel. And this simple physics principle, refraction, it dictates everything about optics. We harness that bending by shaping the medium into lenses.
So, okay, if we shape a piece of glass so it's thicker in the middle and thinner at the edges, that's a convex lens.
Correct. And because of that specific curvature, the light hitting the outer edges of the lens hits at a steeper angle than the center. This forces the outer rays to bend inward. So parallel light rays entering a convex lens will converge. They come together to a single, highly focused intersection called a focal point.
But what if we need to do the opposite? Like if the light is focusing too fast and we need to spread it out?
Then we use concave lenses. Those are thinner in the middle, thicker at the edges. So the peripheral rays hit the glass ahead of the central rays, causing the light to diverge or spread outward.
Got it. And there's one more shape, right? The cylindrical lens. This one is a bit harder to picture.
Yeah, so a spherical lens bends light at all edges equally toward one central dot. But a cylindrical lens only bends light in one specific plane.
I imagine like looking through a glass test tube lying on its side.
Yes. The light converges, but instead of forming a single focal point, it forms a solid focal line, which we'll see becomes incredibly important when we talk about astigmatism later.
Right. But before we swap the glass for biology, how do we actually measure all this bending power?
We use a unit called the diopter. The math is simple, actually. You take 1 meter and divide it by the focal length of the lens.
Let me make sure I have this right. So if a convex lens bends parallel rays just enough so they come together perfectly, exactly 1 meter behind the lens, that's a refractive power of +1 diopter.
Exactly. And if you have a stronger lens that brings it to a sharp focus at just 0.5 meters, it's +2 diopters. A really curved lens focusing at 0.1 meters is plus 10 diopters.
And concave lenses?
Because they diverge light, they get assigned negative diopter values.
Okay, so let's take these concepts out of the physics lab and swap them for biological tissue. Because the human eye isn't just one piece of glass.
Far from it. The eye actually has 4 distinct refractive interfaces. You've got the air meeting the front of the cornea, then the back of the cornea meeting the aqueous humor, then the aqueous humor meeting the front of the internal lens, and finally the back of the lens meeting the vitreous humor filling the eyeball.
That sounds like a nightmare to calculate. Trying to do the math for all 4 interfaces every time we want to understand vision.
It would be. So scientists use a model called the reduced eye. They combine all those surfaces into one single theoretical lens located about 17 millimeters in front of the retina. This reduced eye has a total refractive power of 59 diopters.
Okay, here is the surprise, though. Out of that 59 diopters, where does the power actually come from?
You'd think the internal lens does the most work, right? But actually, about 2/3 of that power comes exclusively from the anterior surface of the cornea.
Wait, if the cornea does 2/3 of the heavy lifting, why does the internal lens get all the credit? Like, everyone talks about the lens when we talk about focusing.
What's fascinating here is that the cornea gets overlooked because it's completely fixed. It's rigid. It only provides massive power because the refractive index of the cornea, which is 1.38, is so different from the air, which is 1.00.
Oh, I see. And the internal lens is surrounded by fluids with similar indices.
Right. So the lens only provides about 20 diopters of baseline power, but it's the star of the show because it's adjustable. It is the only part that can dynamically alter its curvature to keep moving objects in sharp focus.
And since the cornea and lens are both convex, they converge the light. They focus it into a tiny mosaic on the retina. But like we said at the start, that convex bending forces the image to land inverted and reversed.
Yeah, and the fact that you don't perceive the world upside down is purely neuroplasticity. Your brain's visual cortex just learns to interpret it as upright. But to give the brain a sharp image, we have to regulate that internal lens. We call this accommodation.
The mechanics of accommodation are wild. The lens is not hard plastic. It's this viscous fluid inside a really elastic capsule. If you pulled it out of an eye, it would naturally bulge out into a sphere.
Exactly. But inside the eye, it's held flat by about 70 suspensory ligaments pulling outward.
So it's basically being stretched tight against its will.
Right.
And the ciliary muscle, which is controlled by parasympathetic nerves, it attaches to the outer ends of those ligaments.
Right. And here's where it gets highly counterintuitive.
Yes, because if you want the lens to get rounder to focus up close, you'd think the muscle should squeeze the lens, right?
You would, but it's the exact opposite. When the ciliary muscle contracts, the circular fibers act like a sphincter. As the sphincter contracts, the diameter shrinks.
So the attachment points move inward. I always picture the lens like a water balloon stretched tight by strings attached to a metal hoop. If you squeeze that hoop smaller, the strings instantly go slack.
Exactly. The tension relaxes. And because the ligaments are slack, the lens's natural elasticity takes over and it balloons out, increasing its dioptric power. For kids, this accommodation can add up to 14 extra diopters.
That's incredible. But this biological elastic system has an expiration date, doesn't it?
It does, sadly. As we age, the proteins inside the lens denature and coagulate. The lens gets thicker, denser, and loses its elasticity. This is called presbyopia. The accommodating power drops to 0 by age 70.
Wow, 0. So you're permanently stuck at one focal distance, which is why people need bifocals.
Exactly. One artificial lens for far away, one for reading.
But the lens isn't the only thing regulating the image. The pupil acts just like a camera aperture.
Right. A constricted pupil creates a pinhole effect. It physically blocks peripheral light rays. Only the central rays get through, and they hardly need bending at all. This gives you incredible depth of focus.
Because even if the retina is slightly off, the image barely blurs. But with a dilated pupil, all those outer rays flood in, creating a huge blur circle if the focus isn't perfect.
And that leads us to why people need glasses. If you have normal vision, emmetropia, parallel rays focus perfectly on the retina when the ciliary muscle is totally relaxed.
But what if it's not perfect, like hyperopia or farsightedness? The eyeball is just too short, right?
Exactly. The eyeball is physically too short, so the rays haven't converged enough by the time they hit the retina. They want to focus behind the eye. You fix it with a convex lens to add extra converging power.
Okay, and then myopia, nearsightedness. The eyeball is too long, The lens bends the light perfectly, but the retina is just too far back, so the light crosses and spreads back into a blur.
Right.
But wait, if the eyeball is too long, why can't the internal lens just flatten out more to compensate? We just said it was adjustable.
That is the crucial limitation. The eye can accommodate to increase curvature, but it has zero mechanism to decrease the strength of the lens below its fully relaxed baseline.
You can't unaccommodate.
Exactly. Once the muscle is fully relaxed, the lens is as flat as it will ever get. So myopic people need a concave lens in front of the eye to artificially diverge the light before it enters, pushing that focal point further back.
That makes total sense. Then there's astigmatism, which is totally different. The cornea isn't spherical, it's shaped like an egg.
Yes. The curvature in the vertical plane is different from the horizontal plane. So light rays bend at totally different angles. You get multiple focal lines, not a single point.
And the internal lens is useless here because it only bulges symmetrically.
Right. A normal spherical lens won't fix it. You need a customized cylindrical lens at a specific axis to cancel out the egg shape. Or, contact lenses.
So this is one of my favorite anatomical hacks. So what does this all mean for contacts? A contact lens fits right against the eye with just a microscopic layer of tears between the plastic and the cornea.
And the refracted index of human tears is almost exactly the same as the cornea itself.
It's index matching. Because there's almost no difference in the index between the plastic, the tears, and the cornea, the light barely bends when it passes from the tears into the tissue. The jagged biological cornea is literally erased from the physics equation.
It is a brilliant fix. The smooth plastic lens just substitutes for it entirely. Of course, all this assumes the tissues remain transparent.
Right. If we go back to those denaturing proteins from presbyopia, if they fully coagulate, they get opaque and cloudy.
Which is a cataract. If the medium is opaque, light can't pass. Focusing is impossible. The only fix is surgical lens replacement.
Okay, so let's say the optics are perfectly clear and the image lands on the retina. How sharp is it? And how does our brain know where the object is in space?
Let's look at visual acuity first. Even perfectly focused, a single point of light forms a spot about 11 micrometers wide on the retina with a really bright center.
Wait, but in the fovea, the cones are only 1.5 micrometers wide. So wouldn't an 11 micrometer spot wash over a bunch of cones and ruin our resolution?
You'd think so. But because the peak intensity is so concentrated in the middle of that spot, if two separate points of light are focused just 2 micrometers apart on the fovea, the brain can still detect a slight dip in intensity between them. It distinguishes them as two distinct points. That 2 micrometer gap is the standard for 20/20 vision.
Okay, that covers sharpness. What about depth perception? Because the retina is essentially a flat 2D screen.
We use 3 mechanisms. First, simply knowing the size of objects. If a car's image on your retina is tiny, your brain instantly calculates it must be far away.
Right. And the second is moving parallax. I always notice this looking out a train window. The telegraph poles right next to the tracks are an absolute blur zipping past, but the mountains on the horizon seem perfectly still.
That vast difference in sweep speed across the retina is moving parallax. And the third is stereopsis, or binocular vision. Because our eyes are about 2 inches apart, they get slightly different views of an object.
Right. If I hold my finger up to my nose, my left eye sees the right side, right eye sees the left.
Exactly, but it's highly limited. Stereopsis is incredibly powerful for threading a needle, but virtually useless for judging distances beyond 200 feet. The parallax angle just becomes too small.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've built the optics and the sensory system, but this whole delicate structure needs support and nutrition, right?
Yeah.
And it can't use opaque blood vessels because that would block the light.
Right, so it relies on internal fluid systems. Behind the lens is the gelatinous vitreous humor. It's stagnant. But in front of the lens is the aqueous humor, which is highly dynamic and free-flowing.
And it's actively secreted, right, by the ciliary processes behind the iris.
Yes, at about 2 to 3 microliters every minute, the epithelial cells actively pump sodium ions out. That pulls chloride and bicarbonate, and then, the golden rule, water follows via osmosis.
Osmosis never fails. So this aqueous fluid carries nutrients to the avascular cornea and lens. But if you're pumping fluid into a closed sphere every minute, it has to drain.
It does. It flows past the pupil into the anterior chamber, percolates through a porous meshwork of trabeculae, and empties into the venous canal of Schlemm.
And this balance of fluid determines intraocular pressure, which is normally around 15 millimeters of mercury. But here's where it gets really interesting. In a kind of brutal way.
Yeah, glaucoma.
The very fluid keeping the eye perfectly inflated can blind you if the drain gets clogged.
Exactly. Normally, phagocytic cells eat up debris in the trabeculae. But if it gets blocked, say by fibrous occlusion as we age, the fluid has nowhere to go.
But the ciliary processes don't know that. They just keep pumping sodium, and water keeps following.
Right. So pressure rapidly builds inside the rigid eyeball. It can shoot from 15 up to 60 or 70 millimeters of mercury. And the most vulnerable point is the optic disc, where the optic nerve exits.
That high pressure actually physically crushes the optic nerve.
Right, yeah.
Like a tourniquet.
It does. It blocks the axonal flow of cytoplasm from the retina to the brain. Without that nutrition, the nerve fibers starve and die, causing permanent blindness. If we connect this to the bigger picture, an anatomical fluid bottleneck cascades into a lethal failure of the sensory nervous system.
Wow. Looking back at the journey we just took, it's such a miraculous apparatus. We went from the physics of light to the biological lenses to parasympathetic accommodation to astigmatism, acuity, and finally this fluid pressure system that sustains it all.
It really is the ultimate convergence of physics and biology.
Well, on behalf of the Last Minute Lecture team, I want to give a huge thank you to you for listening. You are now officially well-informed and ready to tackle this medical physiology material.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought. We learned earlier that the brain is perfectly trained to perceive the upside-down image on your retina as right side up. It makes you wonder, if you put on a pair of special glasses today that perfectly inverted the light rays so the image on your retina was completely upright, what would happen? Would you be stuck seeing the world upside down forever? Or would your brain eventually rewire itself to flip the world right side up again?